Hey guys, tonight we're going on a journey, not through bustling cityscapes or across shimmering oceans, but deep into the dusty heart of ancient West Africa. Close your eyes for a moment, if you dare, and imagine the sun-baked earth beneath your feet, the endless expanse of the Sahara stretching out before you, shimmering like a mirage, and the distant, rhythmic clang of camel bells echoing in the parched air. You're standing at the edge of a world both vibrant and stark, a place where life clung to existence with a tenacity that would make a desert flower blush. Can you feel the dry heat on your skin, the fine grit of sand between your toes, the almost oppressive silence broken only by the whisper of the wind? Good. Because tonight we're going to explore a kingdom so rich, so influential, yet so often overlooked by mainstream history that, frankly, you probably won't survive this journey without a serious thirst for knowledge. Just kidding, mostly. But seriously, it's a tale of empires built not just on conquest, but on the surprising value of something you probably sprinkle on your chips without a second thought. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're tuning in from somewhere exotic, or even just your couch, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I always love seeing where you guys are chilling. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself, in this moment, at the nexus of an almost unbelievable economic paradox. You've heard the saying, worth your weight in gold, right? Well, in the ancient kingdom we're diving into tonight, there was something else that was, quite literally, worth its weight in gold, if not more. Salt. Yes, that humble, crystalline seasoning essential for life, yet so utterly mundane to our modern palates, was the bedrock of an empire. We're talking about the Kingdom of Ghana, often referred to as the Wagadu Empire by its own people, a name that somehow sounds more fitting for a land forged in the crucible of the desert. Imagine, for a moment, that you are a merchant, perhaps from the bustling markets of North Africa, your caravan laden with shimmering salt blocks mined from vast, ancient seabeds. Or maybe you're a sonic farmer, tilling the relatively fertile lands on the southern edge of the Sahara, your people's ancestral knowledge rooted deep in the soil and the rhythm of the seasons. Both of your worlds, seemingly disparate, are about to collide in a spectacular dance of supply and demand, a dance that will forge an empire. The Sonic people, the architects of this magnificent kingdom, didn't just stumble upon greatness. They cultivated it. Their early settlements, dating back possibly to the 4th century CE, were strategically positioned along the nascent trade routes that snaked across the vast, forbidding Sahara Desert. This wasn't some accidental good fortune, it was a testament to their foresight and adaptability. They understood, intuitively, the power of connection, of being the bridge between two worlds, the salt-rich lands to the north and the gold-rich forests to the south. It's like being the only person with a charging cable at a tech conference. Suddenly, you're indispensable. This exchange wasn't just about commodities, it was about survival. In the arid Sahel region, salt wasn't merely a flavor enhancer. It was a vital preservative for food, especially meat, and a crucial mineral for both human and animal health. Imagine trying to keep your food from spoiling in a scorching climate without refrigeration. You couldn't. Salt became your best friend, your literal lifeline. And for the people in the southern forests, where gold was abundant but salt scarce, this white gold was a desperate need, a constant craving that drove their desire for trade. Historians still argue whether the initial impetus for this trade was purely economic or, if there were deeper, socio-cultural factors at play in establishing these early networks. Was it purely demand-driven, or did cultural exchange facilitate the commerce? It's a bit like wondering if you order a pizza because you're hungry or because your friends are ordering one, probably a bit of both, right? So, you have this natural imbalance. An abundance of salt in one place, an abundance of gold in another. The Sonic, astute observers of their environment and keen entrepreneurs, positioned themselves perfectly as the middlemen, the gatekeepers of this essential flow. They built their power not through brute conquest alone, but through controlling the trade routes, levying taxes on goods, and providing security for the caravans that risked life and limb crossing the desert. Think of it as a very ancient, very dusty toll booth, but instead of taking coins, they took a cut of the most valuable resources in West Africa. This early establishment of trade networks, long before the Ghana Empire reached its zenith, was the quiet, almost invisible force that nurtured its growth. Small settlements grew into towns, towns into cities, and eventually, a confederation of Sonic clans began to consolidate power, recognizing the immense wealth that flowed through their hands. It wasn't just about gold and salt anymore. Ivory, cola nuts, and even enslaved people also became part of this lucrative exchange, fueling the economic engine that would eventually propel Ghana to imperial status. It's a classic case of supply and demand, elevated to empire-building status. And honestly, it makes you wonder what mundane item today, like, say, the humble plastic bottle cap, might be the key to a future empire. Probably not, but a man can dream. The foundation of the Ghana Empire, then, wasn't a sudden burst of glory, but a slow, methodical accumulation of influence and resources. It was built on the back of camels, the sweat of merchants, and the sheer, unadulterated need for a mineral that, in our modern world, we toss over our shoulders for good luck. You are watching, in this early stage, the genesis of a truly unique and powerful African kingdom, one that understood the secret of transforming basic necessities into imperial might. The stage is set, the caravans are forming, and the desert winds are beginning to carry the whispers of an empire rising. As the sun climbs higher over the vast, shimmering expanse of the Sahel, you begin to see how those humble beginnings, those strategic trade posts, blossomed into something truly remarkable. We're talking about the Wagadu Empire, known to the outside world as the Ghana Empire, a name that, ironically, has absolutely nothing to do with the modern nation of Ghana, a common little historical prankster. But I digress. The Sonic people weren't just content to be successful middlemen, they were master organizers. Think less guy who sells snacks from a cooler at the park, and more CEO of a multinational logistics corporation. Their rise to prominence wasn't a sudden, dramatic explosion, but rather a slow, deliberate consolidation of power, much like a meticulous chef building layers of flavor in a complex stew. They understood that control over the Trans-Saharan trade routes wasn't just about collecting tolls, it was about ensuring stability, security, and consistent supply. Imagine trying to run a global shipping company if pirates roamed the seas unchecked and customs officials were perpetually on strike. That's pretty much the chaos the Sonic sought to tame. The Sonic heartland was located in what is now southeastern Mauritania and western Mali, a region that, to our modern eyes, might seem inhospitable, but to them it was home, a place of strategic advantage. They were a people with a deep understanding of their environment, adept at farming the semi-arid lands and, critically, at navigating the social and political landscapes of neighboring communities. Their early leaders, often referred to as Magan or Master of Gold, were shrewd diplomats and capable warriors, establishing alliances and, when necessary, asserting dominance. This wasn't a free-for-all, it was a carefully managed network. One of the key elements in the Sonic's ascendancy was their ability to leverage their indigenous knowledge of the region. They knew the best watering holes, the safest paths, and the subtle signs of approaching sandstorms. This local expertise made them indispensable guides and partners for the North African Berber traders who ventured south. It's a bit like having the only person who knows all the backroads during rush hour. Suddenly, everyone wants to be your friend, or at least pay for your services. As the centuries progressed, particularly from the 8th century CE onwards, the volume of trade across the Sahara intensified. This wasn't just a trickle anymore, it was a steady river of commerce. Gold flowed north, mostly from the Bambuk and Boer goldfields to the south, while salt, copper, textiles, and manufactured goods made their way south. The Sonic Kingdom became the primary entrepot, the grand central station, for this exchange. Their control wasn't just over the physical routes but also over the information flow. They knew who was coming, what they were carrying, and where they were going. This intelligence was, in itself, a form of power. The Sonic rulers didn't just passively observe this trade, they actively managed it. They established a system of taxation that ensured a continuous flow of wealth into the royal coffers. Every ounce of gold, every block of salt that passed through their territory contributed to the kingdom's prosperity. This allowed them to maintain a standing army, further secure the trade routes, and project their power. It's a classic feedback loop. More trade equals more wealth equals more security equals more trade. It's a pretty sweet deal if you can get it. Furthermore, the rise of the Islamic caliphates in North Africa and the Middle East during this period significantly boosted the demand for gold. Islamic economies, particularly those involved in minting coinage, had an insatiable appetite for the precious metal. This increased demand created a powerful pull factor, drawing even more gold out of West Africa and solidifying Ghana's central role. You could say their timing was impeccable, like investing in a tech stock just before it goes viral. But here's a quirky tidbit. While the Sonic rulers were undeniably powerful and immensely wealthy, they largely maintained their traditional animist beliefs, even as Muslim traders and scholars increasingly settled in their lands. This wasn't a clash of civilizations, at least not initially. It was more of a pragmatic coexistence. The king understood the value of the Muslim traders to his economy and provided them with a separate, organized quarter in the capital. Historians still argue whether this religious tolerance was purely a shrewd economic calculation or if it reflected a deeper, more ingrained cultural openness within the Sonic society. Was it just good business, or was it a genuine embrace of diversity? It's a fascinating question, and one that gives you a little more to ponder as you drift off. This policy of tolerance, combined with their military strength and strategic control of trade, allowed the Wagadu Empire to flourish for centuries. It became a beacon of wealth and order in a region that could be volatile. Caravans knew they could find safety and fair dealings within Ghana's borders, which in turn attracted more traders, creating a virtuous cycle of prosperity. The Sonic weren't just building an empire, they were building a reputation, and in the world of ancient trade, a good reputation was as valuable as gold itself. You're starting to see, I hope, that this wasn't just some dusty, forgotten kingdom, but a sophisticated and highly organized state that mastered the art of leveraging its unique geographical position for immense power. You're now standing on the precipice of one of history's most arduous and transformative journeys, the Trans-Saharan trade. Imagine, if you will, the sheer audacity of it. We're not talking about a quick hop across a highway, we're talking about traversing a desert the size of the United States, a landscape so utterly unforgiving that even today, with all our modern technology, it remains a formidable barrier. Yet, across this vast, shimmering sea of sand, life, goods, and ideas flowed, primarily due to one remarkable creature, the camel. Before the introduction of the camel, around the 1st to 3rd centuries CE, travel across the Sahara was a slow, perilous affair, mostly limited to short hops between oases by foot or with donkeys. It was like trying to cross an ocean in a bathtub. But then came the camel, the ship of the desert, and everything changed. These magnificent animals, with their incredible ability to store water, endure extreme temperatures, and carry heavy loads for long distances, revolutionized desert travel. They could go days, sometimes weeks, without needing a refill, turning what was once an impossible barrier into a navigable, albeit still dangerous, highway. It's hard to overstate the impact of the camel. It was the ancient equivalent of inventing the shipping container or the jumbo jet. So, picture this. You are part of a caravan, perhaps hundreds of camels strong, laden with bundles of salt, shimmering textiles, fragrant spices, and crafted goods from the Mediterranean coast. The air is thick with dust, the sun relentless, and the only sounds are the rhythmic padding of camel hooves and the occasional grunt or bray. Ahead lies nothing but endless dunes and rocky plateaus, stretching to the horizon. You travel mostly at night, guided by the stars, the desert air cool and crisp, offering a brief respite from the day's furnace. During the day, you find what little shade you can, huddle together, and conserve your precious water. These weren't just random expeditions, they were highly organized ventures, often led by experienced Berber or Tuareg guides who possessed an intimate knowledge of the desert's secrets, the hidden wells, the changing sands, the signs of distant storms. Think of them as the ultimate GPS and weather app, rolled into one grizzled, turbaned package. They knew the routes, the dangers, and the exact coordinates of every oasis, those vital green islands of life in the sea of sand, where water could be replenished and weary travelers could rest. The routes themselves were not static. They shifted over time due to political changes, the discovery of new resources, or the drying up of old wells. However, several main arteries emerged, connecting North African trading centers like Sijilmassa, Tripoli, and Cairo to the vibrant markets of West Africa. The primary route for the Ghana Empire was typically from Sijilmassa, a major trading city in present-day Morocco, south across the western Sahara to Kumbi Saleh, Ghana's capital. This journey could take months, a true test of endurance and resolve. One wrong turn, one dry well, and the desert claimed another victim. You probably won't survive that trip without a camel that actually listens to directions, and maybe a really good sun hat. Beyond the physical challenges, there were also human elements. While the Ghana Empire provided relative safety within its borders, areas outside its direct control were prone to banditry. Caravans often traveled with armed guards, and the merchants themselves were usually seasoned, resilient individuals, ready to defend their valuable cargo. This was high-stakes commerce, where the rewards were immense, but so were the risks. A mainstream historical fact here is that the Trans-Saharan trade routes were not just conduits for goods but also for ideas and cultures. Islam, for instance, spread gradually across the Sahara, carried by the very merchants who traded gold for salt. While the Sonic rulers of Ghana generally maintained their traditional beliefs, many of their trading partners and some of the communities within their empire adopted Islam, leading to a fascinating cultural blend. This diffusion of religion and knowledge, far from the battlefields of conquest, is a powerful testament to the subtle but pervasive influence of trade. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Historical accounts mention that some Berber traders would carry tiny, meticulously crafted golden scales and weights with them to ensure precise measurements for their gold dust, even in the middle of the desert. Imagine the scene. Dust devils swirling, the sun beating down, and a merchant carefully weighing out a pinch of gold, probably muttering about the exchange rate. It highlights the meticulous nature of this ancient commerce. Historians still argue whether the silent barter system, a method where goods were exchanged without direct contact or verbal communication, was a widespread and common practice or more of a rare, specialized negotiation technique used only in specific, high-tension situations. Was it a pervasive cultural norm for certain exchanges, or merely an occasional workaround for mistrust? It's a debate that continues to add layers to our understanding of these ancient interactions. So, as you hear the distant chime of camel bells fading into the desert twilight, remember that the seemingly simple act of trading gold for salt was underpinned by an epic journey, a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and the indispensable role of a humble, spitting, magnificent beast of burden. The veins of this empire were not rivers of water, but rather these sandy tracks, connecting distant worlds and fueling a prosperity that would shape West Africa for centuries to come. Now, as the dusty caravan finally reaches its destination, you gaze upon Kumbi Saleh, the beating heart of the Ghana Empire, and what you see might surprise you. Forget towering stone monuments or sprawling urban jungles like ancient Rome or Babylon. Kumbi Saleh was, in many ways, a city of two distinct halves, a reflection of the pragmatic coexistence that defined much of the empire's success. It wasn't just a place, it was an idea, a living embodiment of the gold for salt exchange. Imagine standing at the edge of this remarkable settlement, located in present-day southeastern Mauritania. You'd first encounter the Muslim Quarter, a bustling, vibrant hub of activity. Here, you'd find a network of stone houses, probably 2 stories high, built from local materials and designed to withstand the harsh desert climate. Mosques with their distinct minarets would pierce the skyline, calling the faithful to prayer. This was the commercial heart, the domain of the Arab and Berber merchants who had journeyed across the Sahara. Their homes often served as warehouses, brimming with goods from across North Africa and the Middle East. Textiles, copper, dried fruits, and, of course, the precious salt block. The air in the Muslim Quarter would be thick with the aroma of exotic spices, the chatter of numerous languages, Arabic, Berber dialects, Sonic, and others, and the constant hum of trade. Goldsmiths might be hammering away, converting raw gold dust into coinage or intricate jewelry. Scribes would be meticulously recording transactions, their quills scratching across parchment. It was a sophisticated, organized environment, much like any major trading city of the medieval world, albeit one set against the backdrop of the vast Sahara. This was the money-making engine, the place where fortunes were made and lost, and where the empire's economic pulse could be felt most strongly. Then, perhaps a few miles away, connected by a network of well-trodden paths, lay the royal city, the traditional Sonic capital. This was a very different kind of urban space. Here, the architecture was likely more indigenous, featuring large, domed structures made of earth and wood, often surrounded by palisades for defense. These were the residences of the Sonic king, his court, and the indigenous population. This was the seat of power, the spiritual center, and the administrative hub of the empire. In the royal city, you'd find the king's immense palace, a symbol of his wealth and authority, probably surrounded by ceremonial grounds and perhaps even a sacred grove where traditional rituals were performed. The king, known as the Ghana, lived a life of immense luxury, supported by the tributes and taxes flowing from the trade. You might see his retinue, adorned in fine clothes and gold, moving through the streets. This separation wasn't just physical, it was also cultural and, to some extent, religious. The Sonic rulers maintained their ancestral animist beliefs, even as they welcomed and facilitated the trade of their Muslim partners. It's a bit like having a massive, thriving tech campus right next to a centuries-old family farm. Different worlds, but both vital to the local economy. This dual-city arrangement was not an accident, it was a deliberate strategy. By allowing the Muslim merchants to establish their own quarter, the Sonic king ensured their comfort and continued presence, which was crucial for the trade. At the same time, by maintaining his own separate capital, he preserved the traditional Sonic culture, religion, and political authority, shielding it from direct assimilation by the foreign traders. It was a shrewd move, enabling both economic prosperity and cultural autonomy. A mainstream historical fact is that the Arab geographer al-Bakri, writing in the 11th century, provided one of the most detailed accounts of Kumbi Saleh, describing its 2 distinct towns and the daily life within them, including the king's elaborate court and the presence of numerous mosques. His writings are invaluable for understanding this otherwise sparsely documented empire. Here's a quirky tidbit. Al-Bakri also described the king of Ghana's daily ritual of holding court, where he would sit under a pavilion, surrounded by his advisors, dogs, who wore collars of gold and silver, naturally, and drummers who announced his arrival. Imagine having your pet decked out in more bling than most modern rappers. It certainly gave a new meaning to man's best friend. Historians still argue whether the physical separation of Kumbi Saleh into two distinct quarters was primarily due to religious differences, or if it was more about maintaining social control and preventing the cultural influence of the foreign merchants from fully permeating the indigenous Sonic way of life. Was it a buffer against conversion, or simply a practical urban planning decision? It's one of those tantalizing questions that makes historical research so engaging. The ruins of Kumbi Saleh today are largely unglamorous, consisting mostly of foundations and pottery shards, swallowed by the shifting sands of time. But when you imagine it through the eyes of its past inhabitants, you can almost hear the clamor of the markets, the call to prayer, and the distant drums announcing the king's presence. It was a testament to a complex society that understood how to balance tradition with progress, and how to build an empire not just on force, but on the delicate art of economic and cultural diplomacy. The heartbeat of Ghana truly pulsed through the dual arteries of Kumbi Saleh. From the twin cities of Kumbi Saleh, you shift your gaze to the true orchestrator of this grand economic symphony, the King of Ghana or the Ghana himself. This wasn't just a figurehead. He was the central pillar, the golden anchor, if you will, that kept the entire system from spiraling into chaos. His control over the gold trade wasn't merely extensive, it was absolute, and it was this meticulous grip that fueled the empire's legendary wealth. Imagine the king, seated on his throne, adorned with the finest silks and intricate gold jewelry, surrounded by his loyal court. Every piece of raw gold, whether it came in the form of dust panned from riverbeds or nuggets dug from the earth, was considered his personal property. This wasn't some minor tariff. This was a complete royal monopoly. All gold discovered within his dominion had to be brought to him. Failure to comply? Well, let's just say it wasn't a good career move. This royal ownership wasn't just theoretical, it was enforced with a powerful army. The king maintained a large, well-equipped military force, capable of suppressing rebellions and protecting the trade route. This army wasn't just for show, it was the iron fist that protected the golden goose. You can almost hear the rhythmic thump of their war drums, a constant reminder of the king's authority. The most ingenious aspect of the king's control was his strict regulation of the gold nuggets. While gold dust could be traded freely in the markets, all large gold nuggets were reserved exclusively for the king. This policy had a brilliant twofold effect. First, it ensured that the monarch possessed an unparalleled personal fortune, literally owning the largest, most impressive pieces of wealth. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it prevented the market from being flooded with gold, which would have depreciated its value. By controlling the supply of large nuggets, the king effectively managed the empire's gold reserves and, by extension, the stability of its entire economy. It was an ancient, highly effective form of monetary policy, long before anyone coined the term quantitative easing. Think about it. If suddenly everyone could find and trade massive gold nuggets, the value of gold dust, the common medium of exchange, would plummet. The king's foresight in preventing this was crucial to Ghana's sustained prosperity. It's like owning the only source of pure diamonds and deciding to only release the smaller, cut stones to the public, keeping the colossal ones for your own crown. Very smart, very effective. This monopolistic control meant that when foreign dignitaries or rulers sought gold, they had to deal directly with the king. This further enhanced his power and prestige on the international stage. He was not just a regional ruler. He was the primary dispenser of West African gold, a commodity desperately desired across North Africa and Europe. This elevated his diplomatic standing and gave him considerable leverage in negotiations. A mainstream historical fact here is that the immense wealth of the King of Ghana was widely reported by Arab chroniclers, who often described him as the wealthiest monarch on earth due to his direct control over the gold supply. These accounts, while perhaps embellished for dramatic effect, nonetheless underscore the sheer scale of the kingdom's riches. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that the king's horses, too, were occasionally adorned with gold, or that their stalls were lined with finely woven mats. Imagine your horse having better accessories than you do. It just goes to show you the level of extravagance that existed in this ancient court. Historians still argue whether the king's strict control over gold was solely an economic strategy to maintain value and wealth, or if it also carried a deeper, spiritual significance tied to sonic cosmology, where gold might have been seen as a divine substance closely linked to royal power. Was it purely about the Benjamins, or was there a sacred dimension to his golden grip? It adds a fascinating layer to the political economy of the empire. Beyond the gold itself, the king's power extended to controlling the flow of other goods and the protection of the trade routes. Caravans entering and exiting Ghana's territory paid duties, which further enriched the royal treasury. This revenue allowed the king to fund his administration, maintain his army, and support the elaborate court life that impressed foreign visitors. He was, in essence, the ultimate gatekeeper, the lord of the desert highways, and the custodian of West Africa's most valuable resource. So, as you envision the Ghana, sitting amidst his golden splendor, surrounded by the tangible evidence of his vast wealth, remember that this opulence was no accident. It was the direct result of a carefully orchestrated economic system, underpinned by military might and a shrewd understanding of supply and demand. His control wasn't just about accumulating riches. It was about safeguarding the very foundation of an empire built on the shimmer of gold and the stark necessity of salt. Now, let's flip the coin, shall we? You've heard all about the glinting, shimmering gold, the very symbol of wealth and power. But just as crucial, if not more so for daily survival in the ancient Ghana Empire, was something far less glamorous, yet utterly indispensable: salt. Imagine living in a world without refrigeration, without modern food preservation techniques, and in a climate that literally made you sweat away vital minerals. Suddenly, that humble shaker on your dining table becomes a matter of life and death. For the people of West Africa, especially those living in the hot, humid regions to the south of the Sahara, salt wasn't a luxury, it was a fundamental necessity. You see, the human body needs salt to function properly. Without it, you can suffer from dehydration, muscle cramps, fatigue, and in severe cases, even death. Think about running a marathon in the desert without electrolytes. That's the kind of physiological challenge they faced every day. So, a steady supply of salt was critical for maintaining health and energy. Beyond biological needs, salt played an enormous role in food preservation. How do you keep meat from spoiling in a scorching climate? You cure it with salt. How do you store fish for later consumption? You salt it. This allowed for the accumulation of food surpluses, which in turn supported larger populations and enabled longer journeys, like those undertaken by the merchants. Without salt, their diet would have been severely limited, and widespread famine a constant threat. It was the ancient world's best refrigerator, all in one crystalline package. The primary sources of this precious salt were the vast salt flats and mines in the Sahara, particularly Gaza, a desolate, blistering hot location far to the north, deep in the desert. Here, salt was not merely extracted. It was mined in massive, solid blocks, often weighing many pounds. Imagine the arduous labor, cutting through thick layers of salt under the relentless sun by hand. These blocks were then loaded onto camels, beginning their long, slow journey south. The salt was so abundant in some areas that structures, even entire houses, were literally built from salt blocks. It's hard to fathom, isn't it, a house made of something you typically just sprinkle on your fries? The value of salt in the South was inversely proportional to its availability. In the gold-rich forest regions, salt was incredibly scarce, making it a highly coveted commodity. This created the perfect economic imbalance for trade. The North had an excess of what the South desperately needed, and vice versa. It was a classic case of complementary economies, a beautiful dance of needs and resources. A mainstream historical fact is that the demand for salt in West Africa was so high that it was often exchanged ounce for ounce with gold in certain areas, particularly in the Deep South where it was scarcest. This astonishing equivalence underscores just how vital salt was to daily life and survival in the region. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some historical accounts suggest that the salt caravans were so vital that even in times of drought or hardship, the flow of salt was prioritized, sometimes even over the movement of grain. Imagine being more worried about your salt supply than your bread. It speaks volumes about its foundational importance. Historians still argue whether the control over salt mines and distribution routes was as centralized and monopolistic as the control over gold, or if it was more fragmented among various Berber and Saharan groups before reaching the Ghanaian heartland. Was the white gold as tightly managed as its yellow counterpart, or was its journey more of a free-for-all before reaching the empire's coffers? It's a debate that highlights the complex logistical challenges of ancient trade. So, while the king of Ghana sat on a throne of gold, the very foundations of his empire, the health of his people, and the preservation of their food depended on the consistent, perilous journey of those shimmering white blocks across the vast desert. You see, the true genius of the Ghana Empire wasn't just in accumulating gold, but in understanding the profound, life-giving power of something as simple, yet as precious, as salt. It was the other half of the empire's heartbeat, perhaps less flashy, but no less essential. You've seen the gold, you've understood the salt, and you've even pictured the king's luxurious, gold-bedecked existence. Now, let's dive into one of the most intriguing and often debated aspects of the Trans-Saharan trade, the silent barter. Imagine a marketplace where no words are exchanged, where trust is built not on negotiation, but on a series of carefully orchestrated actions. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, doesn't it? Yet, for centuries, this was reportedly a common, albeit mysterious, method of exchange between the gold miners of the southern forests and the salt merchants from the north. Picture yourself, a sonic middleman perhaps, arriving at a designated trading spot deep in the forest, perhaps by a riverbank. You've brought your carefully measured quantities of salt, fabrics, or other goods. You lay them out in neat piles on the ground, usually at dawn. Then, you retreat, moving out of sight, but remaining close enough to observe. This isn't a quick coffee break, this is a patient waiting game. Later, the gold miners, the Wangara people, emerge from the dense foliage. They approach the piles, inspect the goods, and then, without uttering a single word, they place a quantity of gold dust next to each pile of goods that interests them. This gold dust isn't just dumped, it's meticulously measured, a silent offer for the value they perceive. Once their offers are laid out, they, too, retreat, disappearing back into the forest, leaving their gold and the goods untouched. Now it's your turn. You, the sonic trader, reappear. You survey the gold offerings. If you're satisfied with the amount of gold offered for your goods, you take the gold, leaving the goods behind. This signifies acceptance of the trade. The Wangara then return, collect their desired goods, and the transaction is complete, all without a spoken word. However, if you're not satisfied with the gold offered, you leave both the gold and your goods untouched, again retreating from the scene. This signals that you believe the offer is too low. The Wangara then return, see that their offer has been rejected, and if they still desire the goods, they will add more gold to their original piles. This process continues, back and forth, until both parties are content with the exchange, or one party simply gives up. It's a bit like a really slow, high-stakes game of charades, where everyone understands the rules implicitly. Why this elaborate dance of silence? Several theories abound. One dominant theory suggests it was a mechanism to overcome language barriers between different ethnic groups who did not share a common tongue. If you can't talk, you can still trade. Another, perhaps more compelling, reason was security and mistrust. The gold miners might have feared revealing the exact locations of their mines to outsiders, and the traders might have been wary of direct contact with people who controlled such valuable resources. The silent barter created a buffer, maintaining a degree of anonymity and reducing the potential for conflict or exploitation. It's like a super introverted person's dream marketplace. No small talk, just efficient transactions. A mainstream historical fact is that the practice of silent barter was widely documented by Arab geographers and chroniclers, most notably al-Masudi in the 10th century and al-Bakri in the 11th century, who described its use in the gold trade of West Africa. Their accounts provide fascinating, albeit sometimes perplexing, insights into this unique system. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts even suggest that the gold miners would tap on rocks or make specific sounds from within the forest to signal their approach or their acceptance/rejection of an offer, adding another layer of silent communication to the whole process. Imagine a secret code of tapping to signify deal or no deal. Historians still argue whether the practice of silent barter was as widespread and consistently practiced as the Arab chroniclers suggested, or if it was a more episodic phenomenon, employed only in specific circumstances where trust was low or linguistic barriers were insurmountable. Was it the norm or a niche solution? The scarcity of indigenous written records means we rely heavily on external accounts, leaving room for fascinating scholarly debate. The silent barter wasn't just a quaint historical anomaly. It was a highly effective and adaptable system that facilitated trade between groups who might otherwise have had no means of peaceful interaction. It highlights the ingenuity of ancient societies in developing solutions to complex logistical and social challenges. And as you picture this silent, patient exchange in the depths of the African forest, you get a deeper appreciation for the nuanced ways in which goods, and ultimately wealth, flowed through the veins of the Ghana Empire. It really makes you wonder if we could solve some of our modern communication issues by just not talking. Probably not, but it's a thought. As the Ghana Empire basked in its golden glory, a formidable storm was brewing on the horizon, one that would eventually shake its foundations to their core: the rise of the Almoravids. Imagine a religious revival movement, fueled by zealous faith and military might, emerging from the vast, unforgiving expanses of the Sahara. This wasn't just another nomadic tribe. This was a transformative force that would reshape the political and religious landscape of North and West Africa. The Almoravids were a militant Islamic Berber dynasty that originated in the 11th century, initially among the Sanhaja Berber tribes in present-day Mauritania and Western Sahara. They were driven by a fervent desire to purify Islamic practice and spread their interpretation of the faith. Think of them as a highly disciplined, religiously motivated special forces unit, but on an empire-building scale. Their initial focus was on consolidating power among various Berber tribes and then extending their influence northward into Morocco and Andalusia, Islamic Spain. However, their gaze eventually turned southward, towards the immense wealth of the Ghana Empire. The Almoravids saw Ghana not just as a wealthy kingdom ripe for conquest, but also as a land where traditional animist beliefs still held sway among the ruling elite, despite the thriving Muslim merchant community in Kumbi Saleh. This provided a religious justification for their expansion, framing it as a jihad, a holy struggle to bring the Sonic rulers into the fold of Orthodox Islam. It's a classic tale of religious fervor meeting economic opportunity, a combination that has historically proven to be incredibly potent and often quite destructive. The Almoravid incursions into Ghana began around the mid-11th century. These weren't necessarily full-scale invasions in the European medieval sense, but rather a series of sustained military pressures, raids, and sieges against Ghana's northern provinces and key trading outposts. Their superior military organization, combined with their fervent religious motivation, made them a formidable adversary. Imagine facing an army that believes divine favor is on their side. Pretty intimidating, right? The constant pressure from the Almoravids disrupted the vital Trans-Saharan trade route. Caravans, once relatively safe within Ghana's sphere of influence, now faced increased risks of attack. This disruption was devastating for Ghana, whose prosperity depended entirely on the smooth flow of goods. It's like a modern economy suddenly facing a complete shutdown of its major shipping lanes and internet infrastructure. Chaos ensues. A mainstream historical fact is that the Almoravid conquest of Ghana, culminating in the capture of Kumbi Saleh in 1076 CE, is widely cited as a major contributing factor to the empire's decline. While the exact duration and nature of the Almoravid occupation are debated, their impact on Ghana's political structure and economic stability was undeniable. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some historical narratives suggest that the Almoravids initially struggled against Ghana's well-trained army, particularly its cavalry. It was only through sustained campaigns and the gradual weakening of Ghana's defenses due to internal strife and resource drain that they were able to achieve their breakthroughs. It wasn't a quick, easy victory, which makes Ghana's resilience all the more impressive. Historians still argue whether the Almoravid conquest was the sole or primary cause of Ghana's decline, or if internal factors, such as environmental degradation, succession disputes, and the rise of competing regional powers, were already significantly weakening the empire from within, making it vulnerable to the external pressure. Was it the decisive blow, or simply the final push for an already teetering giant? It's a complex puzzle, and one that historical scholars love to grapple with. Even after the initial conquest, the Almoravid hold over Ghana was likely tenuous and short-lived in many areas. However, the damage was done. The prolonged warfare exhausted Ghana's resources, fragmented its political unity, and permanently disrupted the trade networks that were its lifeblood. Many Sonic communities, tired of the conflict, began to migrate, further weakening the empire's demographic and economic base. So, as you hear the distant war cries and the chanting of the Almoravid warriors, know that this was a turning point for the Ghana Empire. The once unshakable Golden Kingdom, built on the delicate balance of trade and traditional power, was now facing a challenge it could not fully withstand. The desert, which had once been its highway to prosperity, now brought forth the forces that would ultimately lead to its downfall. The dust settled, but the landscape of West Africa had been irrevocably altered. The Almoravid ascendance, whether a conquering force or merely a catalyst, marked the beginning of the decline and dispersal of the once mighty Ghana Empire. You see, an empire built on trade routes is incredibly vulnerable when those routes are disrupted, and when its central authority is challenged. It's like a sophisticated machine that suddenly loses its power source and its essential lubrication. Things start to grind to a halt, then break down entirely. Following the Almoravid pressure, Ghana didn't just vanish overnight. Empires rarely do. Instead, it experienced a prolonged period of fragmentation and decline. The centralized power of the Ghana king, which had been so effective in monopolizing gold and protecting trade, began to wane. Local chiefs and provincial rulers, no longer held firmly in check by a strong central authority, started to assert their independence. This was a classic case of centrifugal forces pulling the empire apart from within, much like a spinning top slowly losing momentum and wobbling out of control. The economic consequences were immediate and severe. With the Trans-Saharan trade routes made perilous by ongoing conflicts and shifting political allegiances, the flow of gold and salt, the empire's very lifeblood, slowed to a trickle. Merchants, always pragmatic, sought safer, alternative routes or simply avoided the region altogether. This meant less revenue for the royal treasury, which in turn meant less ability to maintain the army, less security for traders, and a further erosion of central authority. It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? Less money, less power, more chaos. Furthermore, there's evidence suggesting that environmental changes may have played a role in Ghana's decline. Periods of drought could have strained agricultural resources, leading to internal migrations and increased competition for dwindling fertile lands. While perhaps not as dramatic as a conquering army, the slow, relentless creep of desertification would have steadily eaten away at the empire's ability to sustain its population and its economic activities. It's a subtle, almost invisible antagonist, but no less formidable than any army. As Ghana weakened, various subject peoples and neighboring states saw an opportunity to break free or expand their own influence. The Sasso Kingdom, a former tributary state located to the south, began to rise in prominence, eventually conquering remnants of Ghana's territory in the early 13th century. Later, the burgeoning Mali Empire, under legendary figures like Sundiata Keita, would fully eclipse Ghana, absorbing its remaining territories and incorporating many of its trading networks into its own burgeoning domain. It's like watching one dominant company slowly get overtaken by new, agile startups. The old guard eventually fades. A mainstream historical fact is that by the 13th century, the Ghana Empire had largely ceased to exist as an independent, unified political entity, with its former territories and trading networks being absorbed into the rising Mali Empire. Its decline marks a significant shift in the balance of power in West Africa. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some oral traditions and early Arabic accounts suggest that the final fall of Kumbi Saleh involved a dramatic siege or battle, possibly even involving mythical beasts or powerful sorcerers on both sides, lending a legendary quality to the end of the empire. While probably not historically accurate, it shows the powerful narratives that grew around this pivotal event. Historians still argue whether the decline of Ghana was primarily a direct result of external military conquest, particularly by the Almoravids and later the Sasso, or if it was a more complex process of internal disintegration, environmental pressures, and the gradual rise of new, competing economic and political centers. Was it a knockout blow or a slow, drawn-out illness? The truth, as ever, is likely a blend of both. You can almost feel the weight of history settling on the land as the vibrant markets grow quieter, the grand king's court loses its luster, and the once impregnable borders become permeable. The Sonic people, though their empire was in decline, did not vanish. They dispersed, blending into other emerging societies, carrying their knowledge of trade, administration, and craftsmanship with them. The seeds of Ghana's legacy would be scattered far and wide, eventually contributing to the flourishing of subsequent West African empires. So, as the echoes of the Ghana Empire fade into the desert winds, remember that even the mightiest empires are subject to the relentless forces of change, whether they be external invasions, internal divisions, or the subtle, pervasive pressures of the environment. The golden age of Ghana was over, but its influence, like the shifting sands, would shape the future in ways its founders could never have imagined. Even as the great walls of Kumbi Saleh crumbled and the central authority of the Ghana king faded into legend, the threads of its influence didn't simply unravel and disappear. Far from it. The legacy of the Gold Road continued to weave itself into the very fabric of West African history, profoundly shaping the empires that followed and the economic landscape of the region for centuries to come. You see, when you establish a fundamental pathway for wealth, even if the original gatekeepers falter, that pathway often finds new custodians. Think of it like laying down the first superhighway in a vast continent. Even if the first company that built it goes bankrupt, the road itself remains, and others will inevitably use it, adapt it, and build new infrastructure around it. That's precisely what happened with the Trans-Saharan trade routes perfected by Ghana. These ancient arteries, connecting the gold fields of the south to the markets of the north, were too vital to simply abandon. When the Mali Empire rose to prominence in the 13th century, it didn't reinvent the wheel. It inherited, adapted, and expanded upon the very trade networks that Ghana had established and controlled for so long. The Malian emperors, particularly figures like Mansa Musa, shrewdly recognized the enduring value of controlling the gold and salt route. They built their own immense wealth and power by taxing the same trade that had enriched Ghana, often using the very same established paths and trading centers. It was a seamless transition of economic power, with new players but familiar rules. The knowledge and infrastructure developed by Ghana were invaluable. The expertise in navigating the desert, the understanding of supply and demand for gold and salt, the established relationships with North African traders, all these were legacies that passed down, often through the very sonic merchants and scholars who dispersed from the declining empire. They became the skilled workforce, the logistical gurus, for the new powers. Imagine inheriting a perfectly functioning, incredibly profitable business, simply needing to put your own brand on it. Furthermore, the very concept of a powerful, centralized state in West Africa, capable of controlling vast territories and orchestrating long-distance trade, was pioneered by Ghana. Its existence proved that such an empire was not only possible but incredibly prosperous. This served as a blueprint, an inspiration, for subsequent states like Mali and later Songhai. They saw what Ghana had achieved and sought to emulate and even surpass it. It was a powerful demonstration of what was achievable in the region. A mainstream historical fact here is that the Mali Empire, which succeeded Ghana as the dominant power in West Africa, directly benefited from and expanded upon the established Trans-Saharan trade routes, further cementing the region's role as a primary source of gold for the Islamic world and Europe. Here's a quirky tidbit. Even after its political decline, the name Ghana continued to be associated with immense wealth and the source of gold in medieval Arab and European maps and accounts for centuries, long after the empire itself had ceased to be a unified entity. It was as if the idea of Ghana, the Golden Kingdom, outlived the physical reality. Historians still argue whether the administrative structures and tax systems employed by the Mali Empire were direct adaptations of Ghanaian models, or if Mali developed largely independent, albeit similarly effective, methods for managing its vast trade. Was it a direct copy or merely a parallel evolution? It's a fascinating question about the continuity of governance in the region. Beyond the grand empires, the legacy of the Gold Road trickled down to the grassroots. The trade routes fostered cultural exchange, leading to the spread of ideas, technologies, and, most notably, Islam. While Ghana's rulers largely maintained their traditional beliefs, the proliferation of Muslim traders meant that Islamic scholarship, architecture, and legal systems began to take root in key trading towns and eventually influenced wider society. The seeds planted by the gold for salt exchange blossomed into a rich intellectual and religious heritage. So, as you trace the invisible lines of commerce across the sands, remember that the fall of an empire is rarely an ending. More often, it is a transformation. The Ghana Empire, though it faded from direct political power, left an indelible mark. Its innovations in trade, its strategic mastery of resources, and its very existence as a powerful African state created an enduring legacy, a golden blueprint that would guide the rise of new empires and continue to connect West Africa to the wider world for centuries to come. The road was still there, waiting for the next travelers. As the political landscape of West Africa shifted, and the direct power of Ghana waned, something else of profound significance continued to flourish and evolve: the rich tapestry of oral traditions and the rise of Timbuktu. You see, in a world where written records were sparse, particularly for indigenous histories, the human voice became the most vital archive. And as the great trading empires rose and fell, the knowledge, stories, and wisdom of generations found new homes, particularly in burgeoning intellectual centers like the legendary Timbuktu. Imagine sitting around a crackling fire under a vast, star-studded African sky. A griot, a West African storyteller, musician, and praise singer, begins to speak. His voice is a living library, containing the epic tales of kings and warriors, the genealogies of ancient clans, the wisdom of ancestors, and the intricate details of historical events. This wasn't just entertainment. It was education, law, and history, all woven into compelling narratives. The stories of Ghana's rise, its wealth, its trade, and its eventual decline would have been faithfully preserved and transmitted through these oral traditions for centuries, long before any European scholar put pen to paper about the region. It's like having Wikipedia, but instead of typing, you're listening to a master storyteller with perfect recall. These oral traditions are incredibly resilient. They adapt, they absorb new events, and they ensure that the memory of past greatness, like that of Ghana, persists even when physical structures crumble. The griots, often part of specific hereditary castes, were meticulous in their training, ensuring accuracy and consistency across generations. They were the unofficial historians, the cultural guardians, and the living links to a glorious past. As the center of gravity shifted from Ghana to Mali, and later to Songhai, so too did the intellectual hubs. While Kumbi Saleh was primarily a commercial city, the new empires fostered centers that combined trade with profound scholarly pursuits. This is where Timbuktu enters the scene, evolving from a humble seasonal camp into one of the most celebrated intellectual and spiritual centers of the Islamic world. Picture Timbuktu during its golden age, particularly from the 14th century onward. It wasn't just a bustling trade hub where gold and salt exchanged hands. It was a city of scholars, jurists, astronomers, and theologians. Libraries brimmed with tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands, of manuscripts. The Sankore Mosque, in particular, became a renowned university, attracting students and scholars from across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. Imagine a city where books were literally more valuable than gold for many of its inhabitants. It's a delightful thought, isn't it? The knowledge accumulated in Timbuktu wasn't just religious. It covered a vast array of subjects: mathematics, medicine, astronomy, law, philosophy, and history. Many of these texts, written in Arabic or local languages using Arabic script, documented the very Trans-Saharan trade that had underpinned Ghana's existence, and they often contained insights into the history of earlier West African kingdoms. These manuscripts are now a treasured, albeit often fragile, record of a sophisticated intellectual heritage. A mainstream historical fact here is that Timbuktu, particularly under the Mali and Songhai empires, became a major intellectual and spiritual center, housing vast libraries and universities that attracted scholars from across the Islamic world, preserving and advancing knowledge. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some of the ancient Timbuktu manuscripts contain treatises on subjects as diverse as conflict resolution, hygiene, and even astrology, revealing a holistic approach to knowledge that extended far beyond purely religious text. You could learn how to solve a dispute, stay clean, and predict your future, all in one sitting. Historians still argue whether the volume of manuscripts in Timbuktu was truly as vast as some historical estimates suggest, possibly reaching hundreds of thousands, or if these numbers were exaggerated to convey the city's immense intellectual prestige. The difficulty of accurate counting in ancient archives always leaves room for scholarly debate. The rise of Timbuktu and the enduring power of oral traditions illustrate that the legacy of Ghana extended beyond economic structures. It fostered an environment where knowledge was valued, transmitted, and expanded upon. The trade routes, originally pathways for commodities, became conduits for ideas, for stories, and for the very intellectual foundations of future civilizations. So, as you close your eyes and listen to the whispered tales of ancient empires, remember that the wisdom of the past isn't always found in dusty books, but often lives vibrantly in the rhythm of a griot's voice and the quiet, scholarly pursuits within ancient, sun-baked cities. You might think that the story of gold and salt, of ancient empires and camel caravans, is neatly confined to the dusty pages of history books. But incredibly, the echoes of this ancient trade still resonate, subtly yet powerfully, in modern echoes of ancient trade across West Africa today. The historical arteries laid down by the Ghana Empire, and subsequently by Mali and Songhai, continue to influence contemporary communities, their economies, and even their cultural identities. Imagine, for a moment, that you're not in an ancient desert, but driving across modern-day Mauritania or Mali. You might still encounter groups of Tuareg or Fulani herders moving their livestock along routes that perfectly align with historical caravan paths. These aren't just convenient tracks, they are pathways etched into the landscape and the collective memory of the people, shaped by centuries of trade and migration. The logic of the ancient routes, connecting water sources, bypassing treacherous terrain, linking key resource areas, remains just as valid today. It's like using a medieval map to navigate modern traffic. Surprisingly, it still often works for the main arteries. Even more strikingly, the trade in salt, that white gold, continues to this very day. While not as dominant as it once was, salt mined from places like Tadeni in Mali is still transported by camel caravans across the desert to various markets. These journeys are arduous, dangerous, and a testament to the enduring power of tradition and necessity. You can watch documentaries about these modern caravans, seeing men and camels facing the same relentless sun and shifting sands that their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. It's a direct, living link to the very commerce that built Ghana. And what about gold? While large-scale industrial mining now dominates much of the gold extraction, artisanal mining, using traditional methods, still provides a livelihood for countless individuals in West Africa. The gold dust that fueled Ghana's economy is still being panned from rivers and dug from shallow pits, often in the same regions that supplied the ancient empire. The demand has changed, the global markets are different, but the fundamental resource and the human effort to extract it remain. It's like finding a small, independent coffee farm still hand-roasting beans just down the road from a Starbucks. The legacy also manifests in the spatial distribution of towns and cities. Many modern settlements in West Africa owe their very existence and strategic importance to their location along these ancient trade routes. They developed as market towns, rest stops, or administrative centers for the caravans, and they continue to serve similar functions today, albeit with asphalt roads and petrol stations instead of sand paths and watering holes. The ghost of the camel caravan still subtly guides urban development. A mainstream historical fact here is that the Trans-Saharan trade routes, established centuries ago, continued to be important channels for commerce and cultural exchange well into the 19th and early 20th centuries, adapting to new commodities like cola nuts and even serving as pathways for colonial expansion before modern transportation fully superseded them. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some remote markets in West Africa, you might still find an elderly merchant who can tell you, with incredible precision, the historical exchange rates between salt and gold in their region, passed down through generations of traders. It's a living memory of Ghana's economic system, walking and talking. Historians still argue whether the persistence of these traditional trade practices, particularly the salt caravans, is primarily due to economic necessity in remote areas lacking modern infrastructure, or if it's also deeply rooted in cultural identity and a desire to preserve ancient ways of life. Is it purely practical, or is there a strong element of heritage at play? It's a fascinating question about the interplay between economics and culture. So, the next time you sprinkle salt on your food or see a piece of gold jewelry, take a moment to remember the long and incredible journey of these commodities. The story of the obscure African kingdom that traded gold for salt isn't just a bedtime tale from a distant past. It's a living, breathing history that continues to shape the lives and landscapes of West Africa, proving that some pathways, once forged, endure for millennia. Having explored the enduring economic and cultural fingerprints of the Ghana Empire, let's now consider the fascinating, often frustrating, yet ultimately rewarding work of piecing together its story, the realm of archaeological whispers. Unlike empires that left behind vast stone cities or extensive written chronicles, Ghana's history largely exists as faint impressions in the sand and fragmented accounts from external observers. Imagine trying to reconstruct a complex jigsaw puzzle when half the pieces are missing, and the other half are covered in dust. That's the challenge archaeologists face. The primary site associated with the Ghana Empire is Kumbi Saleh, but even its exact location was a matter of scholarly debate for centuries. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that significant archaeological work began to pinpoint its remains in present-day Mauritania. When you visit the site today, you won't see towering ruins like the pyramids of Egypt or the Colosseum in Rome. Instead, you'll find sprawling mounds of earth, scattered pottery shards, remnants of mud brick walls, and the faint outlines of ancient structures. The relentless desert environment, with its shifting sands and extreme temperatures, has been a particularly harsh mistress to the physical remains of the empire. The challenges are immense. Many of Ghana's buildings were constructed from perishable materials like mud, wood, and thatch, which simply do not survive well over centuries in a hot, arid climate. Contrast this with the stone structures of other ancient civilizations, and you begin to understand the difficulty. It's like trying to find evidence of a very elaborate sandcastle after a strong wind. Furthermore, unlike other regions with abundant hieroglyphs or cuneiform tablets, Ghana had no extensive indigenous written tradition, relying primarily on oral histories. This means archaeologists rely heavily on material culture to interpret daily life, trade patterns, and societal structures. Despite these hurdles, archaeologists have made significant discoveries that slowly peel back the layers of time. Excavations at Kumbi Saleh have uncovered evidence of the dual city structure: the stone houses and mosque remains of the Muslim quarter, and the more traditional Sonic dwellings. They've found grinding stones, iron implements, glass beads, and various types of pottery, which offer clues about diet, craftsmanship, and trade connections. Each shard of pottery, each rusted tool, is a tiny whisper from the past, providing tangible evidence of a bustling civilization. One of the most valuable insights comes from the sheer quantity of imported goods found. Chinese ceramics, North African glass, and copper artifacts speak volumes about the extensive reach of the Trans-Saharan trade network that Ghana controlled. These items confirm the accounts of the Arab chroniclers and paint a picture of an economy deeply integrated into the wider Afro-Eurasian trade system. It's like finding a 10th century iPhone in a medieval dig site. It immediately tells you something groundbreaking about their connections. A mainstream historical fact here is that archaeological excavations at Kumbi Saleh have confirmed the site's dual city structure as described by medieval Arab geographers, providing crucial corroboration for written accounts of the Ghana Empire. Here's a quirky tidbit. Among the more unusual finds at Kumbi Saleh have been small, finely crafted weights and balances, some made of intricate alloys, used for weighing gold dust. These tiny, precision instruments highlight the sophisticated commercial practices of the time, suggesting a high degree of mathematical understanding and meticulousness among traders. Historians still argue whether the limited archaeological record of Ghana is primarily due to the destructive nature of the environment and construction materials, or if it also reflects a nomadic or semi-nomadic aspect of the Sonic elite that left fewer permanent monumental structures compared to settled agricultural empires. Was it the elements, or a cultural preference for less permanent grandiosity? It's a compelling point for debate among scholars trying to reconstruct their physical footprint. So, while the Ghana Empire might not boast the same visible ruins as some of its contemporaries, the diligent work of archaeologists continues to unearth its secrets, transforming those faint whispers in the sand into a more coherent narrative. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, allowing us to better understand this fascinating, powerful, and ultimately elusive kingdom that once held the balance of gold and salt in its hands. It reminds you that history isn't always etched in stone, sometimes it's just waiting to be carefully brushed from the desert floor. After all this talk of gold, salt, silent barters, and shifting sands, you might be left with a lingering question: why is the Ghana Empire, a kingdom of such profound wealth and strategic importance, still relatively obscure in the grand narrative of world history? Why isn't it as widely recognized as, say, ancient Egypt or the Roman Empire? Let's delve into Ghana's enduring mystique, the very reasons why this powerful kingdom often remains a hidden gem in the historical curriculum. One of the most significant factors, as you've probably gathered, is the scarcity of indigenous written records. Unlike many other ancient civilizations that left behind vast libraries of stone inscriptions, papyrus scrolls, or clay tablets, the Ghana Empire relied heavily on oral traditions for transmitting its history, laws, and knowledge. While incredibly rich and detailed, oral histories are often viewed differently by Western-centric historical methodologies, which traditionally privilege written sources. It's like having a brilliant, beloved family recipe that's passed down by word of mouth for generations, but then a cooking show asks for the written recipe for their archives. It simply doesn't exist in that format. Furthermore, much of what we do know about Ghana comes from the accounts of medieval Arab geographers and chroniclers. While invaluable, these external perspectives often focused on the aspects of the empire that were most relevant to their own interests, namely trade, wealth, and the spread of Islam. They didn't necessarily provide a comprehensive internal view of Sonic society, culture, or daily life. It's like trying to understand an entire country just by reading its trade reports and tourist brochures. You get a picture, but it's far from complete. Then there's the issue of archaeological visibility. As we discussed, the building materials predominantly used by the Sonic, mud, wood, thatch, simply don't stand the test of time in the same way as stone or fired brick. This means that spectacular, easily identifiable ruins that would draw tourists and international attention are largely absent. There's no towering pyramid or colossal amphitheater to capture the public imagination. The wow factor for the casual observer just isn't there, even if the archaeological significance is immense. It's tough to get excited about mounds of dirt, even if they're historically significant mounds of dirt. The geographical location also plays a role. The Ghana Empire was located deep within the Sahel region, far from the Mediterranean coast and the major centers of European and Middle Eastern power. This remoteness, while beneficial for its control over Trans-Saharan trade in its heyday, meant it was less frequently visited by those who would write its story for a global audience. It was a powerful, self-sufficient entity that didn't necessarily interact extensively with the powers that would later dominate global historical narrative. A mainstream historical fact here is that despite its immense wealth and influence as a major trading power, the Ghana Empire is often overshadowed in historical curricula by contemporaneous European or Middle Eastern empires, partly due to the limited number of readily accessible primary sources from within the empire itself. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval European maps, even those depicting Africa, would often label the entire region with variations of Regnum Gani or Land of Gold, highlighting its fame in the outside world, even if the specifics of its internal workings remained largely unknown to them. The idea of Ghana was more famous than its detailed history. Historians still argue whether the relative obscurity of the Ghana Empire in global history is primarily due to the lack of monumental architecture and indigenous written records, or if it's also a product of historical biases in academia that have traditionally focused more on European and Mediterranean civilizations. Is it a problem of evidence or a problem of perspective? It's a very important question, and one that often sparks lively debate among scholars. Despite these challenges, the story of the Ghana Empire is slowly but surely gaining more recognition as scholars continue to explore oral traditions, conduct archaeological digs, and reevaluate existing written sources. Its importance as one of the earliest and most powerful complex societies in sub-Saharan Africa, a testament to sophisticated organization and economic prowess, cannot be overstated. So, as the light outside your window dims, and you reflect on the silent barters and golden kings, remember that sometimes the most profound histories are those that whisper to us from the shadows, shrouded in mystique, waiting for us to listen more closely. The obscurity of Ghana isn't a testament to its unimportance, but rather to the fascinating, ongoing work of bringing its rich story into the light. As the echoes of the gold for salt trade begin to fade, and the sun sets on the ancient empire of Ghana, let's take a moment to reflect on the unseen threads of history. You see, history isn't just a collection of grand events, famous figures, or impressive ruins. More often, it's a complex web of subtle connections, seemingly obscure interactions, and forgotten innovations that, unbeknownst to us, continue to shape the world we inhabit today. The story of Ghana, this vibrant, resourceful kingdom in the heart of West Africa, is a perfect illustration of this profound truth. Consider for a moment the very idea of global trade. The Trans-Saharan networks, perfected by Ghana, weren't just regional exchanges. They were vital links in a nascent global economy, connecting West African gold to the markets of North Africa, the Middle East, and ultimately Europe. Without this steady flow of gold, the medieval European economy, for instance, would have looked vastly different. The coins jingling in the pockets of European merchants, the intricate jewelry adorning their nobility, much of it could trace its origins back to the distant goldfields controlled by the Ghana Empire. It's a fundamental interconnectedness that often goes unrecognized in standard historical narrative. You might be holding a piece of jewelry right now, and a tiny atom of gold in it could have once traveled across the Sahara on a camel, a millennium ago. Wild, isn't it? Then there's the concept of strategic resource management. The Ghana Empire understood, with remarkable foresight, how to leverage its unique geographical position and its control over vital commodities to build immense wealth and power. Their sophisticated system of taxation, their monopoly on gold nuggets, and their ability to maintain peace along dangerous trade routes were all innovations that resonate in modern economic and geopolitical strategies. Nations today still vie for control over vital resources and trade routes, seeking to emulate, consciously or unconsciously, the ancient wisdom of the Ghana. They were doing supply chain management before anyone even thought of the phrase. Furthermore, the story of Ghana highlights the enduring human capacity for adaptation and ingenuity in challenging environments. Living and thriving in the harsh Sahel, developing complex social and economic structures, and undertaking perilous journeys across the Sahara, these were not trivial feats. They speak to a resilience and resourcefulness that is deeply embedded in human history, a reminder that innovation often arises from necessity. It's a testament to the fact that people, when faced with extreme conditions, will always find a way to survive and often to flourish. The cultural exchange fostered by the Trans-Saharan trade also left an unseen legacy. The gradual spread of Islam, carried by merchants rather than conquering armies in many instances, illustrates the power of cultural diffusion through commerce. It led to the development of unique syncretic cultures, blending indigenous traditions with Islamic influences, creating vibrant intellectual centers like Timbuktu. The intellectual contributions of these centers, rooted in the networks Ghana helped establish, were significant, yet often overlooked in the broader historical narrative. A mainstream historical fact here is that the gold from West Africa, largely flowing through empires like Ghana, was a crucial component of the European gold supply for centuries, contributing significantly to the continent's economic development and the eventual age of exploration. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scholars theorize that the advanced navigational skills of the Trans-Saharan guides, including their knowledge of celestial bodies and desert topography, influenced later maritime navigation techniques developed by European explorers. Imagine a bit of desert wisdom accidentally guiding a ship across the Atlantic. Historians still argue whether the absence of Ghana from mainstream global historical narratives is a greater loss for our understanding of Africa's rich past, or for the broader human story itself, given its pivotal role in global economic systems. Does its obscurity diminish our understanding of a continent, or does it blind us to the interconnectedness of all human civilization? It's a question that encourages us to broaden our historical horizons. So, as you drift off, perhaps imagining a camel train silhouetted against a setting sun, remember that the seemingly obscure African kingdom that traded gold for salt was not just a fascinating chapter in history. It was a vital thread in the grand tapestry of human civilization, quietly yet profoundly shaping economies, cultures, and the very pathways of our interconnected world, in ways that continue to echo even today, in the quiet corners of our modern lives.